The following is brought to you in partnership by SIMBULL. SIMBULL is a new sports marketplace where you can trade shares of professional teams like stocks. You love sports. You interested in fantasy sports without the weekly annoyance of fantasy league upkeep? Then SIMBULL's the app for you. With SIMBULL, fantasy sports is going to a whole other level. How it works is simple. You buy SIMBULL shares for your favorite sim teams on the app. When your sim team wins, you get automatic cash deposits, and you don't lose any money when they lose. That's it. So if you follow trends across football, basketball, and baseball, and you think your team is a sleeper, simply invest in your favorite sim teams on SIMBULL and watch your virtual portfolio prove you right or wrong. And if you want to get in on the action right away, Vendetta Sports Media's got you covered. Go to simbull.app/Vendetta and use our exclusive promo code Vendetta, and you'll get a $10 bonus when making your first deposit. SIMBULL, taking fantasy sports to a whole other level.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to this edition of Kriegs Korner. It's Corner with a K. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Kevin Gold. Kevin, how you doing?
Good. How are you today, Adam?
Good. I'm doing well. I appreciate you coming on. So
No problem.
I don't even really know how to properly introduce you. From my understanding, you're a sports agent. You do primarily NFL right now.
Correct.
But that wasn't always the case. But before we kind of get into the specifics, when did you know the sports field was something you're going to be a specialist in, and then how did you become an agent? What was that process like?
Yeah, so I grew up, like many, loving sports, but it became clear, I would say, just after high school. Your viewers can't tell, but I'm 5'6", so my chance of playing anything, either at the collegiate or professional level, was close to zero. I suppose I could have been a racehorse jockey, but I knew I loved sports, but I wanted to play some role in it. So actually playing was no longer possible in college. So I started to look into other options, and after college, I got a political science degree. I went to the University at Albany, and I was a paralegal in a New York City law firm, working really late hours. And one night I came home and I do what sports fans in New York did back then. You listen to WFAN sports radio, and I happened to call up and they had a sports agent on. And back then, this was like the late 80s, there wasn't all the information about sports agency. There wasn't movies, there wasn't books, there wasn't internet courses. There wasn't even any internet, actually. So I had this agent on, and this was late at night. So I called up and I said, hey, and it happened to represent one of the New York Mets at the time. And I said to this agent, hey, I want to be an agent. What do you recommend? He said, look, if you want to be an agent, the only way to do it is to go to law school. So that's what I did. I went to law school. I live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I went to a place called Widener University. And I just happened to want to be there. Some people go to law school because they want to be in court, because they want to argue with people, because they want to save the world. I did it because I wanted to be a sports agent, and that was probably the best path to give me some ability to do it. So I became a lawyer, and as you mentioned, I dabble in a lot of sports. So I focused in football now. So I've been registered as an NFL agent since 1996 or 97. So I'm at the point where I just did my 100th contract a couple of years ago. So I've been doing the football for a long time, but really in the beginning, I was any athlete who was looking for help, whether it be baseball, minor league baseball players, minor league hockey players. I kind of represented, I could afford to be, I couldn't be selective because I didn't have a choice. So I dabbled in a bunch of different sports. In baseball, you have all these minor league players. So it's pretty easy to develop a relationship with a player. Same with hockey. I mean, at the time, there were so many different minor leagues that I just started to dabble in different sports until I ultimately and eventually focused on football.
Wow. this is maybe won't speak so much like our listeners, but like you mentioned WFAN, it's one of my, it used to be one of my staples. Now it's kind of under a weird trajectory in the past few years. I could literally
Yeah.
I could talk for an hour about New York sports radio. It's the best. But so you mentioned you just
This is
did.
back in the early days of the late 80s. And it just, again, there was no internet, not to sound like an old man, but I am an old man. There was no internet and there was no real way to get, the ESPN was just growing. So WFAN and sports radio, they were the only one in town, certainly in New York, and one of the biggest in the country. And it was a great way to hear sports news all the time.
So you mentioned you just finished your 100th NFL contract. You've been a registered NFLPA agent since like 97. The league has obviously grown so much since then with revenue and TV deals and all that stuff changing. So how is that really affected for, your negotiations, and how much has the money changed in that short amount of time?
Yeah, I remember when I started, the minimum salary, so the lowest you could make as a rookie was, I believe, $125,000. I say that because my first client at the time, who happened to be a long snapper, which kind of led to my niche of representing snappers, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but he made $125,000 his first year. That was the minimum. And then back in the late 90s, that was good money. This year, if you're a rookie coming into the NFL this season, we have the draft coming up at the end of the month. A rookie must make $660,000. So you can see the growth of minimum salaries, let alone the growth of, other salaries, and the cap just going up and up and up. So what happens as a consequence is, as an agent, you can make more money. And most agents in the NFL take 3% of the contract. That's the most you can take. So, if you're thinking 3% of a long snapper making 660,000, it's about 18, 19 grand. If you're thinking 3% of what Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers gets, that's a lot more money. So what happens is there's more money in the sport, and that brings more agents. So what I see is there's a lot more kind of what I was in the late 90s, kids coming out of law school saying, hey, this is a great way to make a living. Reality is it's very difficult. It's difficult to get clients. It's difficult to get clients that are good. It's difficult to get a client in the NFL. It's difficult to get him healthy and get to his next contract, because the big money really is in that second contract. So the big money kind of brings in more competition and more agents. So if you're an agent and you're in the business and you're doing well, it's great. If you're trying to get in, it's very tough because it's a very competitive business. I saw the latest numbers. There's 750 agents that are registered in the NFL. And I should mention that let's say you want to represent an NFL player, you can't just do it. You have to be registered by their union, which is the NFLPA. They have 750 agents, and I think a third of them, possibly more, don't even have a single client. So that shows you how competitive it is. There's probably, at any time, there's 2,100 active NFL players, and most of them are represented by probably, 1/8 or 1/9 of the agents that exist out there.
Crazy. I didn't even realize that you could be a registered agent and then not even have any clients. How long do you typically, like, not you specifically, but how long could you go without having a client before you get booted from the PA?
That's a great question. Back when back to sound like the old man, when I registered, they didn't have a limit. As long as you kept paying the annual fee, they would take your money.
Everyone will take your money.
Everyone will take your money. Well, they're a little different. They said, you know what? For some of you guys, we're not even going to take your money. So basically the rule is you must negotiate at least one NFL contract every 3 years. And if you don't do that, if you don't negotiate at least one every 3 years, we're not even going to take you. It's not even worth taking your money. It's the 3-year rule. The interesting thing is that many NFL teams, all NFL teams have a practice squad, usually 10, 12. This year was up to 16 players because of COVID, but they have this reserve squad of practice squad players. That's not even enough. So it's not enough to have a guy on the practice squad. You have to negotiate at least one contract every 3 years, or they're going to kick you out. And there have been some established agents who have, you kind of hit a bad streak. You get a bunch of players get hurt, or you don't have a good recruiting class, and you could literally be out of your profession in 3 years. So they really have put some tight limitations on who they're going to allow to be an agent and how long you could be unsuccessful, for lack of a better word, until they're going to kick you out.
So you mentioned that your first client you were registered in 97. So how the market's like kind of oversaturated now with so many agents, but how did you get your first agent, and how do you continue to, or your first client, and how do you continue to keep getting your clients, especially since it's such like a niche market?
Yeah, it was. Again, I wish I had more information now, because honestly, if I had the information back then, I probably wouldn't have done it, because I was out on my own. I was working at a law firm and doing the sports stuff on the side, and literally I was helping anybody. So I was in Harrisburg. I am in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We have a small Division II school near us called Shippensburg University, and they have some good D2 football programs, but they tend not to make the NFL. And sure enough, I was helping a Shippensburg football player, just helping him try to get in the league. And he said, you know what, my friend was in the league last year, and he's trying to make the league as a long snapper. And at the time, I didn't even really know what a long snapper was. But I was introduced to him. A famous story is I met him in a mall food court in Harrisburg. He always jokes around that was our big introductory dinner was sitting at a food court in the mall. But I said to him, look, I will make you my priority, because parentheses, I had no one else to really make my priority. Sure. He had been in a training camp. He happened to be in the Jets training camp in, I think, 93 or 94. And he got tired of his agent, and he wanted a fresh start. And all I had was time, right? Because I can't tell you I have a track record. I can't give you my, success, but I can give you my time. And sure enough, he made it. A guy by the name of Rob Davis. He bounced around a couple NFL camps. He played in the CFL. Trivia situation here is the CFL, the Canadian Football League, actually played 1 year in America, and they had American teams, and he was playing for the Baltimore Stallions, which was the name of the team. He won the Grey Cup, which is the championship, and then the next year went back to the NFL. And long story short, he had a 13-year career. For a long time, he was my only client, but ended up having the typical career of a long snapper, which is, if you do your job and you do it well, you can stay in the league a long time. He stayed in the league for 13 years. Went to the Packers front office. He's now the assistant head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. So he kind of lucky that my very first client not only had a long and successful NFL career, but also has a long and successful off the field career as well.
Are you still his agent? Or
yeah, so I helped. I haven't done many coaching contracts, but I helped negotiate with the Dallas Cowboys for his assistant head coach contract last year, which was kind of a neat experience. I wish the team did a little better, but it was still a fun experience. So.
You and Jerry Jones exchanging text messages every now and then?
It was Jerry's sons involved.
Steven.
It wasn't Jerry himself. I was waiting for one of the Joneses to call me, because I don't get too intimidated negotiating against people, but that would have been a little intimidating. So it worked out.
the name alone. So you kind of mentioned that you were your first client was a long snapper, and to my understanding, you've kind of stayed in that position. That's been your bread and butter, so to say.
Yeah. So again, this was the late 90s. So we have to remember, this was the time the internet was just developing. So I had one client. I had Rob Davis, who was this long snapper. And for those who don't know, I assume everybody knows what a long snapper is, but if you don't, they come in 8 to 10 to 12 plays a game on a punt or a field goal, on a punt. So on fourth down, when you see the punter standing there, the long snapper snaps the ball to the punter. So his job is to snap the ball there quickly and accurately on a tight spiral, block his guy and run downfield and try and make the tackle, or at least get out of the way if somebody else is trying to make the tackle. And they also snap on field goals and extra points. So they don't use the regular center for that. They use the specialist, the long snapper, and he snaps the ball to the holder on field goals and extra points. So that was my client base. These guys playing 8 to 10, 12 plays a game. And I had Rob Davis, and one day we were talking, and he's like, you know what? Through representing me, you've learned so much about long snapping. Why don't we set up a website? And again, that sounds like a simple idea now, but this was the late 90s, and the internet was just developing. And I got a website at longsnap.com, and we decided to kind of shine a light on this very anonymous position. And what was happening in the NFL is teams were starting to use just the guy who snaps. In the past, they would say, oh, let's use the tight end, or let's use the linebacker, or this offensive lineman. Well, the NFL started to specialize. So at this time, I had one client who just happened to be a long snapper. The league was starting to use only long snappers, and the internet was developing. So I put together this website, and literally from there, clients in college, some of the best college long snappers started to learn about the website, started to follow me. And from there, I started to build this niche of snappers. So yeah, my client base has been primarily these anonymous players. From there, I've added a few more. Another SHIP alumni is John Kuhn, who was the famous fullback for the Packers for many years. That kind of led to a little fullback niche that I have. So my sons attended the University of Wisconsin, so I've represented a couple of Wisconsin fullbacks. I have one in the draft this year. So I would say long snappers and fullbacks are kind of my niche. The only problem with that is, long snappers, there's only 32 of them, and fullbacks, half the teams don't even use one. So
less than 32, that's for sure. So
probably could have a better niche would have been cover corners, but you can't pick your niches. They kind of find you. So.
It is what it is, and it's
yeah.
It's not, so how many current long snappers do you represent?
So I have two that are in the league now, one with the Bears and one with the Raiders. And then I also represent my other niche, I guess. I try to represent players where I went to college. So the University of Albany is an FCS, basically a 1AA school. They've had a few players in the league. So I represented a player from there last year. So mostly specialists, long snap, a couple of long snappers, a couple of fullbacks, and then a couple of Albany players tossed in.
What was it like negotiating for John Kuhn and with the Packers when they don't even really have, like, they're the most interesting in front office and how that all runs? How much different was that than your other clients?
So John's contract was the biggest contract I ever did, because when you're representing snappers, you don't really do headline deals. But I had a unique situation with John was that he was a free agent and the NFL had just come off a work stoppage, and this was 2011. So he was a free agent and he was a hot free agent. He had come off a great year. And I'd never been in a situation where I had a client who was a free agent who had multiple teams trying to get him. But that's what happened with Kuhn. The Giants were interested. A bunch of teams were interested in signing him. And that's one of those rare situations where you have leverage so you can kind of drive up the price. So that was a great negotiation. He ended up signing a 3-year deal, $7.5 million, which isn't huge for NFL generally, but for fullbacks,
it's definitely yeah.
And this was 10 years ago. It was a good deal. And the interesting part is you see a lot of NFL deals that are big money, and they sign 5-6-year deals. They only make it to year 2 of that contract. The interesting thing about John, not only do you make it the end of that contract, he ended up signing 3, 4, one-year deals after that. So, the good part about that, roughly $8 million deal was that he earned every penny of it. So that was, to me, that was exciting, because that's one of those rare situations where you have a player kind of hitting free agency, who's healthy at the peak of his value, and that unfortunately doesn't happen a lot with long snappers. So
maybe this isn't so much the case with you and your client specifically, but how come the NFL contracts are just so overblown? The numbers are so big. Like, for example, the Taysom Hill contract that was, this offseason, it was outlandishly large number. I laughed when I read it, the initial tweet, but then a few more details come out, and it's like, he can get X amount of money for 1 year, and then there's nothing guaranteed. So why do they make these ridiculous numbers?
I would say there's two things at play here. Unlike basketball and unlike baseball and unlike hockey, when you see an NFL contract, that number is largely not guaranteed, right? So when you see when you see the Mets sign Lindor to $325 million, he is getting every single cent of that, whether he's on the Mets or not. Let's hope he is in 10 or 11 years. But he is making every cent of that contract, because that contract is guaranteed, which means if he's injured, if he's cut, whatever the reason, he will make that money. Same in basketball. So you see ridiculous numbers thrown around in basketball to mediocre players. Those players are getting that money. In the NFL, it's different because the contracts are largely not guaranteed. So when you see a 5-year deal, us agents know it's really 1-year deal, maybe 2-year deal. And after that, we'll renegotiate it. So why are those deals happening? Number one is for cap purposes, because the longer the deal, they can spread out the value over the cap.
Right.
But that's also, too, it's agents are competitive by nature. So they're going to release the max value of a contract to the press so they can say, hey, look what I got Taysom Hill. He just signed a 3-year X million contract. Well, guess what? He's going to probably be cut in 2 years, and he's not going to earn half the money that was represented, but it's going to look good for agent purposes. So agents in other sports kind of laugh at the NFL agents, right? Because there's all these NFL agents, and we're working hard for 3%, and there's no guarantee, that we're going to get more than a year or two out of that contract. Whereas in basketball and baseball, your client is making whatever they're earning, they're making that money. Unfortunately, most NFL contracts aren't guaranteed. The only guaranteed money you really get is that signing bonus or other guarantees you can negotiate. And that's why it's always a big issue of, hey, how much of this is really guaranteed? How much is incentives, and how much is it just phony money to make the numbers look big?
But why if every agent knows, like you just said, that the numbers are phony and they're all inflated just for fun. Like, why does that still happen? Because obviously the players that are coming in, and I know the NFLPA does a good job of trying to educate them on how to spend their money, and I'm sure there has to be at least like a half-hour course on like, yeah, these numbers don't make sense. They're really big and they're not actually happening. So don't listen to these agents that are necessarily doing it. But why does that cycle keep going? Does it have to do with like Schefters and Rappaport that just also want to keep doing it like that? Or is it just?
Yeah, because I see it on Twitter. So as an NFL agent, this is your office right here. It's your phone. You see it all the time. And Schechter will come out with, and they all want to beat each other to the story. So they have certain agents who will feed them information. And when an agent feeds you a story 2 hours into free agency, they're going to tell you what the max value is. They're not going to say, well, it's really 10 million. But if he has an insane year, it's going to go up to 20. They're going to put it in the best possible light. The reporter is going to put it on the best possible light. And people only care about the headline. Once in a while, you'll see a tweet and they're like, oh, you know what? The contract for this guy actually came in and it's not nearly as big. I saw that recently with Ndamukong Suh signed a deal with the Buccaneers. And at first it was reported, oh, it's going to be 10 million. And then you actually read the fine print and it's a lower number. So, it is a game. College players, sometimes they're just going to focus on the headline. They're not going to read behind the details, or they're not going to follow up and say, hey, you said you signed this guy to a 3-year, $50 million contract. Why did he only earn $5 million of it? It's the headline that gets the attention.
What's your, have you ever broken news? You ever had to text Schefter for a scoop or break any news of yours?
It's funny. My kids are always impressed by this, but Schechter and Ian Rappaport, I have their cell phone numbers because, they'll even cover snapper stories. So I met a lot of them through John Kuhn. But I remember, I think it was Ian Rappaport. I had still have a snapper on the Bears, Patrick Scales, who got hurt in preseason, and he tore his ACL. And Ian Rappaport was all over me. He wanted to get the scoop on what the injury was. So I gave him the scoop over Labor Day weekend. My client got hurt. He was out for the year with an ACL. And I gave Rappaport the scoop. I don't know how many people cared other than me and Pat Scales' family, but he thought it was newsworthy. So
Rappaport hits you up for it. It's not like you chose to go to him first, or
I don't. Yeah, I so rarely do I, as an given my client base, I really don't scoop reporters. I'm friends with some of the guys in the Chicago media. So Pat Scales, a good example. He's my Chicago snapper. He actually just signed a $1 million contract in the offseason, which for a long snapper, that's decent money. So you tell one of your local reporter friends and he runs with it. So once, it works both ways. They'll promote your clients. You kind of help get them scoops. I don't have enough clients to make much of an impact, but I've made a few here and there.
I feel like just having those numbers in your phone just makes it, no matter what, it's like you get to just say, I have their numbers at any given time. Because like you said, like your job is glued to your phone. Their job is also glued to their phone. So you want their attention. You text them, they're going to see it, whether they choose to answer or not, you have their attention.
And that's what I tell people. Literally, this is where the NFL world is conducted, because even general managers, I mean, it's almost like we're teenagers, because I will text with general managers, personnel directors. Most people think you negotiate a contract. Oh, you fly into the city and you sit in some room and you're hammering out contracts. The contracts are text messages and they're Excel spreadsheets. And that's really the way the NFL works. In fact, I would say the NFL business is probably 80-90% text message nowadays, as opposed to phone calls and all those things. So yeah, sometimes, you look through your phone and you're like, oh, I have this guy's number and this player's number. And, it's just, I'm still impressed inside, but because I have to be professional, I can't act like I'm really excited about it. So
Fair
just
enough.
business.
Last NFL question before we move on to the other stuff. Yeah. So this NFL free agent tampering period, obviously it's all kind of just like smoke and mirrors, because no one comes up with these contract deals in 2 minutes or whatever the turnaround time is. I guess that is out of rule because of before cell phones and texting, and it's just something that's carried on. But why have they got rid of it? What does it actually do?
Well, they actually have an unofficial tampering period of 3 days before free agency. In the past, free agency would start on a date like March 17th, and they had no tampering period. But the truth of the matter is everything would happen at the NFL Combine. Now what they do is 3 days before the official start of the free agency period, you can have discussions. You just can't sign a contract. So they've kind of built in this 3-day window where you can legally tamper. But in the NFL, once you set a rule at 3 days, that just means they're going to start doing it much earlier. Now, this year was different. Historically, the NFL Combine is interesting because for those who don't know, at the end of February in Indianapolis, they'll bring 325 of the best college football players to do workouts, and they televise a lot of those workouts. They come in for workouts, medical evaluations, and interviews. Also, all 32 teams will bring their entire staff, and I mean their scouts, their coaches, front office, back office. They bring everybody into Indianapolis. And then the NFL union brings in all the agents. So if you were to blow up Indianapolis at the end of February with a bomb, you would destroy the NFL because literally everybody is there. So that's when the real tampering begins, because all the agents are there, all the club players are there, they're all there, the college players are there. But the agents and the teams, I've even had it happen to me. They'll say, hey, we're in this hotel. Would you like to meet so we can have a discussion about your player's contract? And, you know, everybody does it. Is it technically illegal? Yeah, but that's just the way that it works. So, yeah, when this clock, you know, if free agency starts at 12 o'clock and you see, you know, it reported on Twitter at 12:05 that somebody signed this huge deal, rest assured that started back in February, probably at the Combine. Unfortunately, we didn't have it this year, but every other year, agents and teams are meeting in February, and that's where they're laying the groundwork for these deals. So
interesting. It's kind of like the NBA where they actually fine people for tampering. But I guess a 3-day legaling tampering, maybe this year it was probably less of it than the past.
it was less this year.
But
Correct.
I'm sure people were still texting and doing what they were doing. You could
It,
still have
it
a meeting over
happens.
Zoom.
It happens all the time, and you know, you say in the conversation, this conversation isn't official, and you nod your head, and everyone agrees it's not official. I would say the NBA seems to, it's off the record. The NBA takes a much harder stance. I mean, in the NBA, you're not even allowed to comment on a player on another team. So they've taken a harder stance. I think the NFL is kind of like, you know, at the end of the day, who's really harmed by this? Everybody does it. It's just the way business is done.
So, like I said, you've done other sports, MLB and NHL, but we mentioned like the minor league system and all that. What's the biggest difference between the NFL and these other agents? Obviously, like season length is different, so there's different annual like values per game or different and all that stuff. But what's like the biggest difference, and how did you even get your start in that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you a couple observations. One, baseball is tough. The nice thing about the NFL is if you represent a college player, you're going to know in a couple of months whether he makes it or not. In baseball, if you represent a drafted player, you're waiting 3, 5, 7 years. So the payoff is much, much longer. Again, there's guaranteed contracts, but you have to help that player all through the minor leagues and help him through that situation, and then hope when he makes the majors that he sticks with you. So that's what's tough about baseball. So a lot of the baseball players I helped were just minor leaguers. You couldn't really charge them anything because they barely make any money. I was just doing it for fun and kind of learning how to deal with players and learning how to deal with their personalities. Hockey players, personally, to me, they're the most accessible, friendliest people of all. Of all the athletes I've ever met, football players are great, but they're not all great. But every hockey player, to me, is just, they're a different breed of people. And I love the time I spent working with minor league hockey players because they grow up loving the sport. They're used to no attention. They're appreciative. They're gracious. But again, even in the NHL, right, outside of the rare first round pick at the top, you're still going to spend time in the minor leagues and riding buses. So, you know, the NFL really doesn't have a farm system. Their farm system really is college football. So football has that benefit of you make it immediately. Baseball, hockey, those are guys who had to pay their dues. And I think that reflects in their personalities a little bit.
I happen to agree with the hockey player. I know one professional athlete. He's a hockey player. He's a great guy, very down to earth and just a very relaxed person. But is the hockey that long? It's not nearly as long as like the minor league process in the baseball is. I mean, it can obviously be a few years, but I mean, I feel like you got to know within like the first 5 years, no?
Yeah, and most hockey players know. And again, if you're drafted high, you at least have that contract to rely on. They're making more money than the MLB minor leaguers because a lot of those minor leaguers are making close to nothing. So NHL, you know, usually you spend a year, if you'll know within a year or two whether you're going to make it to the next level. But yeah, hockey players are great. I live in out near Hershey, and the Hershey Bears are one of the top AHL franchises. So one of the things I do, not as an agent, but as a lawyer, is every year I go in and train the team on social media. So myself and another lawyer at the firm I work with, that's our logo back there, Pillar Off. we will go in and train these young hockey players on how to properly use social media. Again, it's not really an agent. I just do it because, it has to do with some of the areas of the law I deal with. So we'll bring them lunch and we'll tell them about how to be professional on social media, what to avoid, be careful what you share, what you like. And then after that presentation, every single year, every single hockey player will come up to us and shake our hand, look you in the eye and say, hey, thanks for doing this for us. And that you don't often see that level of appreciation from professional athletes. Yeah, we're spending our time and we're trying to help them, but it's rare that you get so many people who will actually, thank you for your time. And hey, this was very beneficial. And they'll give you their cell phone number. Of all the players I've ever dealt with, I always found hockey players to be the most accessible.
Hershey Bears are fun games to go to as well.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's a great. I really miss it this year. There's no fans. My firm sponsors the power play, so every time there's a power play at a Hershey Bears game, it's called the Pillar-Ought power play, but we can't see it this year. And unfortunately for the teams, they're losing a lot of money, and they're losing. The guys like having fans in the stands. It's tough to play hockey when nobody's there.
Actually, I want to go back to the NFL quickly. So this year they introduced a 17th game, and then it kind of looks like we're on the way to an 18-game season with 2 bye weeks or something. They're going to do some sort of variation. But have you had like an experience where these front officers being like, "Oh, we got hurt by the pandemic, this and that," and for contract situations? Meanwhile, we just know they signed the biggest deal ever.
Yeah, I mean, more money's coming in. The 17th game was a trade-off. So the NFL, the Players Association had to agree to that 7th game, but in exchange, they got more money for the players. So, if there's going to be a 17th game, the union has to agree with it. If the NFL wants it, they're going to have to give the union something, and that's, it's always like the give and take of bargaining. Yeah, there's a lot of veterans who are upset about that, but the bottom line is, the NFL was about to reach new media deals and they wanted to have that 17th game. And it's those media deals that help bring all the money into the league and in turn gets it out to the players. So yeah, they're going to eliminate a preseason game. So now we're down to 3. Last year we didn't have any, but the plan is to have 3 preseason games and then you play your 17 games this year.
All right. One of my final things I wanted to mention and bring this up is I appreciate all your time.
Happy to do it.
The Patrick Manley Award. You are the co-founder of it. It is, from my understanding, pretty much like the long snapper of the year, the best long snapper in the country. How did you? I'm assuming it coincided with you trying to bring up the long snapping industry and make it more predominant in turn to make your players more money. But how did that go? How did you go about it? And how quickly did things like legitimize and now you have like a full-blown award?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how fast it happened because it's named after Patrick Manley, who is the most famous long snapper, which means he's not very famous at all. But Manley was drafted in the late night, right after I started kind of focusing on long snappers. He got drafted, I think, in '98. So I had just started. He got drafted. Unfortunately, he wasn't a client, but he got drafted by the Bears just to be a snapper. Ended up playing 14 years. I think he holds the record for most active games by a Chicago Bear. So he's known. I jokingly say he's not the GOAT, right? He's not the greatest of all time. He's the GLOAT. He's the greatest long snapper of all time. So about 2 years ago, that's good. Somebody else came up with it, but between us, I'm taking credit for it.
Perfect.
But anyway, about 2 years ago, I know a person by the name of Chris Rubio. And what Rubio does is he runs these camps for high school players to help get college scholarships. And just about any time you flip on a college game, if there's a snapper in there, chances are he came from one of Chris Rubio's camps. So it was literally about 2 years ago in January, Rubio calls me, he says, Gold, we need a long snapping award. He had already done one for the best high school snapper. He looked around and he said, there's all these college awards, best quarterback, offensive lineman, wide receiver. There's nothing for long snappers. So sure enough, he said, who should we get to do it? And I'm like, well, Patrick Manley, he's the GLOAT. So we came up with this idea in January. By December, we had put it in place. So basically what it is for the best senior FBS long snapper. So the best top level college long snapper, we kind of put together a watch list. We watch all the videotape and we have a committee. We have a committee of about 18 or 20 different college football experts who help us select the best college long snapper. The first year we had the award live in Chicago. There were about 200 people there at a dinner, and that's how it started. Unfortunately, this year, like everything else, it had to be virtual. But our end goal is to ultimately get that long snapping award on the ESPN Home Depot College Football Award. So when you see the best offensive lineman and wide receiver and best cornerback and best punter and kicker, we want you to also see the long snapper award. So we're trying. We'll be entering year 3 this year, and it's just, again, another way to kind of recognize these underappreciated players.
Is there any tips you give your clients that help brand themselves or get themselves out there more? I know you mentioned you do the social media seminars with the Hershey Bears.
Yeah.
Like how do you, especially for, there's, like you said, there's only 32 of them in the NFL. Every team only has one usually. And it's funny. It's one of those positions where when something's going really wrong and you don't know their name if things are going well. Unless of course you're studying them all year, but what, I forget my question, to be honest, but
how do I counsel them on building their brand? So I do. I mean, so much of this is social media nowadays, and snappers. What do NFL players want? They want to make their money on the contract. They want to win, but they also want to get endorsements. And for snappers, it's been hard. I'll be honest. I reached out to snapper lawnmowers. I reached out to SIMBULL. I could never get any traction, but yeah. So I help my players with their Instagram, with their Twitter accounts, to try and build up whatever presence they can. And again, Patrick Scales is my Chicago Bears long snapper. He did a deal with Lowe's because they wanted to talk about NFL players doing home improvement. So they came up with the idea of Scales nails. So they showed my player, Scales, nailing something into a wall, and he made a few $1,000s just to do that ad. So yeah, every player wants to kind of build their brand, and that's my goal, because the NFL stands for National Football League, but it also stands for not for long. So if you're a snap, the average career is 3 years. Long snapper, it's probably closer to 8 or 10, but it's going to end, and those big checks, those $1 million, are going to end at some point. So you want to set them up for their future, and that's where building that brand can really help. So yeah, you try to be part of it, because I mentioned Rob Davidson's my first client. I'm still in touch with him because I'm still working with him. I'm still in touch with John Kuhn, still helping him with his contracts. He's got a radio show in Green Bay. So, that's the thing that makes myself as an agent a little different. Some agents are like, I'm your agent while you're in the NFL. And after that, it's transactional. With me, it's always been a lifetime. I always view it as a lifetime relationship. And so don't measure how well you did while you're in the NFL, measure how you did in the NFL and then when your career is over. So you look at Rob Davis, who's an assistant head coach and was also very successful in private industry, or John Kuhn still has a radio show in Green Bay. He's the sideline reporter for the Packers. Those are the things that make, this is why I stay in this business, is to be part of somebody's success, to help them reach their success on the field and then be successful off the field. Whereas some agents, they're only care about, hey, if I'm not making money off of you anymore, then we're done. And I try to defy that and make it more of a lifetime relationship with my clients.
Kevin Gold, thank you for coming on. I really
No
appreciate
problem.
it. You can find him at longsnap.com. You use Twitter. I know. What's your Twitter?
Yeah,
you want to plug it?
It's at longsnap.com. So everything's longsnap.com is the website. At longsnap.com is the Twitter and also the Instagram. But I'm still learning this whole Instagram thing. And I don't have a TikTok, so we don't worry about that.
I don't have a TikTok either, so don't worry. No one has to worry about that. Exactly. I appreciate your time. Everyone, thanks for listening, and see you guys soon.